All right, welcome everybody back to the Big Douglas Show. This is another edition of Opposition Wednesday. And for that, from Sports Radio 610 in Houston, I brought on Sean Pendergast. Sean, how are you?
Doing good, Doug. How you doing, man?
I'm doing very good. Appreciate you hopping on with me today. I have to admit, I don't watch a ton of the Houston Texans, which is why we do these on Wednesdays, get somebody on that has done a little bit more than I have. We'll get to them. First, though, I'm curious in your bio, as I stalked you a little bit for the show today, you mentioned kolache. Is that right?
Kolache. Yeah.
Kolache.
Kolache.
I have eaten all kinds of foods. I'm not sure I've had that before. Please explain.
A kolache, Doug, is it's like a pig in a blanket, kind of. Okay. It's like, dough with different fillings inside of it. You almost go, the store that is most famous down here in Houston, the chain that's most famous for selling here in Houston is called the Kolache Factory. And you go in and it's almost like a Dunkin' Donuts where there's racks of kolaches. They all look the same because it's just a ball of dough like bread. But inside of them, there's either sausage or egg or brisket they've got like 30 different types of kolaches.
Sweet and savory, or just
they've
savory?
Got sweet and savory. Yeah, they've got some. They've got some that look like danishes that have like cream cheese and fruit. And yeah, they do some sweet ones that have like different types of like fillings on the inside. Sometimes they'll do like a custard one or whatever. Seasonal things like that. But the thing you saw in my bio, where I was the 10th rated kolache eater in the world. The story behind that is that back in 2007, the Kolache Factory had the first ever kolache eating contest.
Okay.
And yeah, kind of like a competitive eater deal that actually included Joey Chestnut. I don't know if you're a competitive eating aficionado at all. Yeah. Yep. So it was all these, there were 10 people in the contest, and they called my radio show, the Kolache Factory did, the day before because one of the eaters had dropped out. And they asked me if I wanted to be, like a last second entrant, because I talk Kolache Factory all the time on my show. So I said, yes, absolutely. I want to compete with the great Joey Chestnut. And so the kolache of choice was just their basic like sausage and cheese kolache. That's like the equivalent of like a glazed donut at a Krispy Kreme or something. It's like their go-to. And so like it just has a sausage link, melted cheese, and it's inside like almost an oval shaped ball of dough. And so it was whoever could eat the most kolaches in 8 minutes. I ate 7.
Okay.
You care to take a guess as to how many Joey Chestnut ate?
20.
56.
God.
56. And it was one of those things where he's dipping them in the water and chipmunking them and everything. Okay. And I'm just like, dude, I get to like the 4th one, and I'm like, if I eat any more, this is going to ruin one of my favorite foods for me, the follow up to that story, I'll make this quick, I promise, is that on the way home, my buddy, who's the marketing guy at Kolache Factory that invited me to be in it, he was responsible for driving Joey and like 2 of the other freaks back to the hotel, Patrick Bertoletti and like one other one, whatever. And they drove past the Jack in the Box at 2 a.m. They were hammered, by the way. Joey Chestnut goes out with 56 kolaches swirling around in his abdomen, goes out, gets drunk, and then on the way home, they stop at Jack in the Box, and the 3 of them ate 40 Jack in the Box tacos between Jack in the Box and their hotel, which was 1.2 miles. Those people are crazy, dude. Incredible. The competitive eaters, yeah, it's absolutely incredible. But I'm the 10th rated kolache eater in the world because I finished 10th out of 10 people in that one contest. So that's the story behind that.
Imperative to not include that when you tell
right. It's just 10th, if you're 10th rated anything in the world, people think you're pretty badass. Yeah.
Really impressive sounding.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Astros won again.
Yeah, that's been big around here, man. That's they won in 2017 and then they won it this year. And this year it feels like we had a long talk about this on my show yesterday. This year it feels more like the fans are really connected with this team. Like the players on this team are like the Beatles now around town. You know what I mean? More so than 2017. Like these guys are making appearances at sporting goods stores. And Jeremy Pena, who's the MVP of the World Series, ran the drive-through at a Raising Cane's yesterday, and the line was out onto the feeder road of the highway. And I think it's because since the Astros were punished for the sign stealing back in 2020, pretty much everybody from every corner of the sporting universe has come after the Astros and Astro fans and things like that. So I think it's one of those things like when you go through something like that as a fan and everybody's just kind of persecuting your team and whatnot, the emotional connection with this team is huge. And they're built – they're even if they lose Justin Verlander, which it's kind of looking like they might now, they're still going to be the favorites in the American League next year.
I think I read he was looking for like a Scherzer contract.
Yeah.
Those things are tough at that age.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a beast, and I can't believe how well he's pitching at his age and after all the different surgeries. But those contracts make me nervous. You know, I don't think they're glad that they gave Scherzer that contract.
Yeah, it's funny. I talked to some folks I know with the Astros that are part of that decision-making process, and I know that they view the Scherzer contract as just this outlier. You know, like that's not the market. That's the Mets. You know, that's right. Really, you know, like Cohen is just spending whatever. The Mets are losing a ton of money because he doesn't care about the luxury tax or anything like that, which is his right to do. But I think most of baseball probably feels similar to the Astros. You know, I think most teams don't want to go over the competitive balance threshold. So, and I know that's how they view it. So if that's going to be the price for Verlander, they will not pay that price. And plus, I don't know that they want to do 3 years either at age 40. Yeah. But it's a good time. That's the only thing. As you pointed out, Doug, you haven't watched a lot of Texans football. You know who else hasn't watched a lot of Texans football? Houstonians.
Yeah, right, yeah.
because it's bad right now.
They call that a segue, so I'll use it.
There you go.
What do you think? What was it going into the season that fans kind of thought this team might be able to accomplish? Because I kind of thought that Davis Mills maybe was ascending, and that maybe the franchise did too. At this point, I mean, Davis Mills is not the future of the program, I can't imagine.
No. I think Davis Mills, I guess just to go back to his rookie year, he started 6 games after Tyrod Taylor got hurt early in Mills' rookie season last year, and he was just not ready to play. He was horrible in those 6 games. And then Taylor came back from the injury. Taylor just didn't play well, got benched, and they started Mills the last 5 games of last year, and they went 2-3 in those games, which for the Texans last year was a nice stretch of football, 2-3. And he actually played really well. He threw 9 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. I don't know if the team came into this year thinking that Mills was going to be the future or that they thought he was necessarily ascending or anything like that. I think that there wasn't a better solution in this draft for the Texans in the 2022 draft. This is a bad draft for quarterbacks. And Mills did enough in those 5 games to where they felt like, all right, well, rolling with Davis Mills makes more sense than us wasting a pick on whoever. So he's regressed this year. There's no doubt about that. Pep Hamilton is the OC now. He was the quarterback's coach last year. Okay. So it's really tough to parse out like where to place the blame. The bottom line is Mills is a worse quarterback this year than he was at the end of last year. And right now, the Texans are trending to have the first pick in the draft. And by the time we get to the end of the season, if they're still in that spot, the drumbeat will be loud for the Texans to use that pick on a quarterback, likely Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud.
Do you have a preference? It's interesting, you know, that we're going to talk about this ad nauseum before the draft starts. They tell you not to scout the helmet, but OSU quarterbacks are what they have been recently.
Yeah.
It makes people nervous. And, of course, Bryce Young's size makes people nervous.
Sure.
How do you look at the two? Do you have a favorite? Do you think they have a favorite?
I don't know if they have a favorite. I don't know if they're even thinking of drafting a quarterback. Nick Caserio is a wild card when it comes to drafting because he's only really had one full draft. His first year here, the draft was totally depleted from all these bad trades that Bill O'Brien had made when he was the GM for that 1 year. So last year was like kind of the first real draft that Nick had, and he used 2 first-round picks, one on a corner, Derek Stingley, and another on Kenyon Green, a guard. So it's really hard to get a gauge, you know. And David, he did draft Davis in 2021, Davis Mills. You know, I don't know that Young or Stroud mirror at all kind of what Davis Mills' skill set is. So I don't know what his preference would be. My preference is Bryce Young from Alabama. The big games I've watched of Ohio State, I haven't been super impressed with C.J. Stroud. I know he puts up huge numbers. The Ohio State thing, I guess, is a bit of a concern, although Justin Fields all of a sudden has turned into this fantasy football monster doing things that he never did at Ohio State, really. Like, they're running all kinds of Lamar Jackson kind of stuff, it feels like, with him. But I love Bryce Young's makeup. I love he's got – it's still Alabama, so they've got talent, but not as much talent as recent Alabama quarterbacks, including himself last year.
Not even
had around him, right? Yeah. So, there's no Jamison Williams or John Mechie or anything like that. The receivers and the skill guys. It's Jahmyr Gibbs, and then it's Bryce Young. So I feel like he's been kind of dragging that team to the record that they had this year. I love the way he's able to kind of throw on the move, running either way. He's got escapability that I think you have to have in today's game, especially if you're going to play on a team that's not that good. Yep. So he honestly, skill set wise, has a lot of the things that the Texans had in Deshaun Watson a couple of years ago, just in a much smaller frame. Obviously, Deshaun is a pretty put together guy, and he's 4 inches taller than Bryce Young. But I like Bryce Young. If it's going to be a quarterback, I like Bryce Young. I could still see a scenario where the Texans, even with the first pick in the draft, that they decide, you know what, let's wait one more year and let's fortify the roster a little bit more and then get a quarterback in 2024. But I'm all in on Bryce Young right now.
That would be my choice as well. And it can't be said, and I forget who said it now. I was reading, somebody wrote an article the other day, and it was like, if you took CJ Stroud and put him on Alabama with those weapons, it'd be a pedestrian team the way you even imagine. If you took Bryce Young and put him on Ohio State with the 7 first-round receivers they got coming down the pipe, he'd be back to, they'd be the number 1 team in the nation, and they'd be crushing everybody. I think it's totally true.
Yeah.
They had 2 first-round picks coming up in the first draft. They had 2 last year. How are the first-rounders doing? I was really high on Stingley Jr. My understanding is he hasn't been everything they'd hoped for. Is that true?
Here's the thing with Stingley, and we'll get to Kenyon Green in a second, because those are the 2. They took Stingley with the 3rd pick, and then they traded back from 13 to 15 to draft the guard Kenyon Green out of A&M. But starting with Stingley, the frustration with Stingley has very little to do with Stingley and more to do with Lovie Smith. Lovie Smith likes to play a lot of that Tampa 2, cover 2, soft zone, big cushion kind of stuff. It was a head scratcher when they drafted Stingley, not because Stingley doesn't deserve to be picked high in the draft, but because he doesn't fit anything that Lovie Smith typically wants to do. And the hope was that, okay, well, maybe this means that Lovie Smith is adapting a little bit, or he's modernizing his defense. And that, by and large, has not been the case. They've got Derek Stingley they're asking Derek Stingley to do things right now that they could have drafted somebody in the 5th round to go do. Just play in your zone, give receivers a big cushion, come up and make a tackle. Like, that's all he's really being asked to do. The guy he gets compared to and is going to get compared to for at least the foreseeable future is Sauce Gardner, because he was taken 1 pick later by the Jets. And Sauce has had a great rookie year for the Jets. But I would say that Sauce, 1, is being asked to do different things than Stingley. You see Sauce a lot more in press man coverage. Stingley you hardly ever see in press man coverage. And I would submit Sauce is just on a much more talented defense than Derek Stingley is with the Jets. With Quinnen Williams and some of the other guys they've got on that defense. So Stingley himself has, for me at least, has not been a disappointment. I've been disappointed in how they've used Stingley and just how boring it's been to watch Stingley. One of my items to watch for this game when I was doing my podcast preview, recording it earlier today, was I hope that Lovie starts to let Stingley spread his wings a little bit. And you know what? Let him get baptized by Terry McLaurin a little bit in this game. Let Stingley go cover Terry McLaurin and chase him around the field for 50 or 60 snaps and see how it goes. I mean, that's the only way he's going to get better. He's not going to get better sitting in soft zone. So the Stingley experience has been a disappointment, but I don't blame Stingley really for that very much.
It's interesting because we here in Washington had same kind of deal going on where Rivera likes to do the same thing. They drafted Benjamin St. Juice, who was a press man outside corner. They first last year tried to force him into the slot. That didn't work. He needed the boundary for help. And then finally this year, when William Jackson gets hurt, they put Benjamin St. Juice outside and they let him play press man coverage. And guess what? He looks really good.
Yeah.
And it always frustrates me with these old guys that like to play zone. I get it. It worked. Whatever. It doesn't necessarily work now. And it certainly, if you have a man that can play that press coverage, then you let him do it and figure the rest of it out. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, the glimpses we've gotten of Stingley when he's been able to do that have been very encouraging. They let him do that some against Denver in week 2 against Cortland Sutton, and he made a few plays. He had an interception against Jacksonville. They don't let him do it that much. So that part's been disappointing. The other first-round pick, Doug, is Kenyon Green, the guard out of Texas A&M.
I was high on him.
Yeah, and we still are here. But again, the disappointment, if there is disappointment in Kenyon Green, it definitely has more to do with Kenyon Green than how he's being used. I mean, he's a guard in a run-heavy offense that's not very good at protecting the passer right now. That's what he is. He needs a year in an NFL weight room to kind of reshape his body and things like that. So all the things you think with an offensive lineman that's just fresh out of college, even a football factory like Texas A&M has been since they got to the SEC. Kenyon Green started the season pretty well. He's on a stretch right now where in week 8 he played against Jeffrey Simmons and got destroyed against the Titans.
As do most.
The Thursday night game was against Philadelphia. He went against Fletcher Cox and Hargrave. They ate his lunch. Last week, Dexter Lawrence destroyed Kenyon Green. Kenyon Green had 2 holding penalties that were declined, another holding penalty that brought back a touchdown. And then on the very next play after the touchdown that was called back, he allowed a pressure which forced Davis Mills into an interception. So he had a rough one last week. And again, you look at the front, the front 4 for the Commanders, and you've got Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne up there. I mean, it's, and Chase Young coming back, although that'll be more of a Laramie Tunsil or Titus Howard problem, on the outside. But that interior defensive line for you guys is going to give Kenyon Green another Sunday of headaches.
They've been giving everybody Sundays of headaches. That those 2 in particular have been fantastic.
Yep.
And Montez Sweat, who's not getting nearly enough recognition, I think nationally. I mean, in the area, of course. We're very familiar. The other pick, go back to the draft, I was really high on was Jalen Petrie, right, from Baylor. How's he looked? Where they have him playing, I guess, in that deep safety role if they're using that Levy Smith cover 2?
They move him around a lot. That is one guy that they've been using the way he was used at Baylor. Right. So I watched a lot of him at Baylor. I have a son that graduated with Jalen at Baylor, so I watched every snap of Jalen Petrie in college. And he was a great player in college, Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. They do move him around a lot like he was used at Baylor. So you'll see him at times come up near the line of scrimmage, and he'll make plays behind the line of scrimmage. In the run game, he's got quite a few tackles for loss for a safety because of how they use him there. Had a couple of interceptions earlier this year against Justin Field that were really kind of quintessential Jalen Petrie type plays. He was a guy that was always around the ball in college, and that's kind of continued here. His biggest issue has been tackling. His tackling has been anywhere from mediocre to horrendous, which is really weird because he was a good tackler in college. So it could just be the uptick in speed. He's taking bad angles. If you watched any of the highlights from that Giants game last week, the Texans played, Darius Slayton had a 50-some-odd yard catch and run for a touchdown. It was an easy catch out in the flat, but Jalen Petrie just comes up like a bullet train and misses the tackle. And then his teammates didn't do him any favors. Everybody else is all the way over on the other side of the field, and Slayton just runs it down the sidelines for a long touchdown, which got Jalen Petrie benched for a series or 2, and then they brought him back in. The team is still very high on Petrie. They're high on all 3 of these guys, but it's been a rough rookie year. Petrie's probably had the best rookie year of the 3 of them, but they've all taken their bumps. The best rookie on this team, and I'm sure we're going to get to him, is Damian Pierce. Damian Pierce is the best player on this team right now.
Let's do it now. I know they brought in Benjamin, and what is the share load they'd like to get to keep Damian Pierce at his best?
Yeah, it's funny. My feeling is that if you bring in Eno Benjamin, which I love the pickup, he's a good player. That I would ideally like to see him take about 5 to 8 of the carries Pierce is already getting, because I just don't want to see Pierce get run into the ground, he's on pace to carry the ball over 300 times this year. Right. I don't need to see him get 300 carries ripped off his odometer for a team that's going to be picking first in the draft.
That's right.
I'm fine with him going out and getting 1,000 yards this year, and he's fun to watch, and he's even more fun to talk to. He's a huge personality, huge. Okay. He's our go-to to have on the post-game show. I do the post-game and the pre-game on the Texans flagship. He's the go-to to have on the post-game show because he's amazing.
Where did he go to school?
Florida.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's the thing, Doug, is he never got this kind of workload at Florida. Like the most carries he had in a year at Florida was like a little over 100.
Right.
He was at that by the middle of October with the Texans, So so ideally, I'd like to see his workload reduced a little bit, just from a pragmatic standpoint. And that's what I was hoping with Benjamin. But Lovie Smith, in his press conference like an hour ago, and this is where kind of the old school stuff I think could come back to bite. But he's like, Eno will get in here and we'll see what we'll see what we've got in him. But my philosophy, I like to have a bell cow running back. And my feelings, if you got a bell cow running back, why would I feed the ball to anybody else? You got a third down back in Rex Burkhead, but a bell cow running back. And I'm going, this sounds like, it reminded me, ironically, a little bit of Dusty Baker back when he was managing the Cubs in the early 2000s, and he would just trot Kerry Wood and Mark Pryor out there and have them throw 250 innings a year without even thinking about it. Ironically, Lovie and Dusty, not only are they in the same town with each other here again, because they were together in Chicago, but they're very good friends. That's what it reminded me of. I'm like, God, he's going to Mark Pryor, poor Damian Pierce, into the ground. Yeah, so I think you guys are going to get a heavy workload, a heavy load of Damian Pierce, unless the run game's not working, which is a distinct possibility against that front that the Commanders have. And then they'll be forced to put it on the arm of Davis Mills. But Pierce has been a joy to watch and to cover, and he's easily the best draft choice that Nick Caserio has made in his 2 seasons here so far.
What does it look like for Lovie Smith? Is the seat getting hot there? Do you think, a lot of times with a GM, if they go quarterback number 1 next year that often, how that goes, they often start them over together. Where do you think he sits as far as his job security goes?
I think it's probably like if we're doing like hot seat ratings, people like 1, it's ice cold, and 5, it's, surface of the sun or whatever. I think it's probably like a 2 right now, like in terms of his job security. It's a complicated thing because the Texans had David Culley as their head coach last year, and they fired him after 1 season. Right. And Lovie wasn't even really in line to get this job. It looked like it was going to go to Josh McCown, who's kind of like Jeff Saturday. He's never been a coach before, other than the high school level, coaching his kid, quarterback coach for Rusk High School here in Texas. Josh McCown was this close to getting the Texans head coaching job, and the Brian Flores lawsuit got dropped right in the middle of all that. Not dropped, like it came out in the middle of all that. Ironically, Flores was the other finalist for the Texans job. So the Texans just out of nowhere pivoted to Lovie, who was the DC under David Culley. And they pivoted to him and they hired him out of nowhere. It was just the next in a series of really weird things the Texans have done over the last 3 or 4 years. Bill O'Brien was the GM of this team for a year. A former chaplain was the guy who was really running everything in Jack Easterby until he got fired like a month ago. The Deshaun Watson thing, we could talk for days about that. Just all kinds of weird stuff has happened with this team. Lovie becoming the head coach when nobody even knew he was a candidate, including probably the Texans, till Flores dropped that lawsuit on everybody. So where I'm going with all this, Doug, is that it would be very difficult, I think, just politically for the Texans to fire Lovie Smith. Firing 2 one-and-done coaches, both African-American, that's a tough look in a league that's hypersensitive to, the Rooney Rule and things like that right now. So I think that gives Lovie some security. I think the McNairs, who own the team, really like Lovie Smith. I think that probably helps. But you're absolutely right. I don't care either way. I personally like Lovie a lot. I don't like the job he's done with this team necessarily this year. But this team is still at least 1 more year of a rebuild away from being relevant again. I'm not even saying being a playoff team. I'm talking about like being relevant where other teams aren't circling them like they're the homecoming game. You know what I mean? So if they keep Lovie or they fire Lovie next year, whatever, what they absolutely have to do if they draft a quarterback is get Pep Hamilton out. Get a modern offense.
Which is wild because I like Pep. It just has not. It's antiquated, huh?
It's antiquated. Yeah, it's antiquated. It's not aggressive. And I feel like there's a trend with a lot of these McVay Shanahan guys where some of them are better coaches than others, but the one thing you can say is their offenses all look like they know what they're doing, and it's not like they've all got world beaters at quarterback either. So especially if you're using a high draft pick on a quarterback. I would like to see them. If Lovey's going to stay, they absolutely have to have a new offensive coordinator and one that's got, I think, a little more updated thinking. To me, the perfect scenario is that after the season is over, the Texans are picking first in the draft. They fire Lovey Smith. They hire D'Amico Ryans, the DC for the San Francisco 49ers, who is a Texans legend. He was a Pro Bowler here, and there's no former Texan, and I'm including Andre Johnson and J.J. Watt and all of the big names that have great respect in this town. Those guys have great respect. Nobody has more respect. I don't know if he's the most D'Amico Ryans, but nobody has more respect than D'Amico Ryans in this town. He was a pillar both in this city and for that team early on in its existence. And he appears to be a very good coach too. Certainly a good defensive coordinator. So my ideal scenario, and I think this would really reinvigorate this fan base, fire Lovey Smith, hire D'Amico Ryans. D'Amico brings one of his Shanahan cronies with him from San Francisco, pull him out of that offensive staff, have them run the Shanahan stuff here, draft Bryce Young, and then let's go eat. That to me is just such an easy blueprint. But again, it's complicated with Lovey Smith.
It is. And would he do that to Pep? Pep, I'm assuming Pep's his buddy.
Yeah. No, and they let Pep pick the whole offensive staff too. Like that's the one thing. Wow. Caserio, whereas with Cully, it really, the 1 year of Cully was just so ridiculous. Like Cully was just so not a head coach. He had never even been a coordinator, and he was making like elementary mistakes in games, and then would literally come in to the press conference on Monday afterwards, like, yeah, you know what? I totally screwed that up. Oh my God, what are we doing here? And it happened on the regular. So Caserio picked out all of Cully's assistants. Lovey got to pick his own staff. So like Pep is his guy. Pep was in the building already, but he got promoted from QB coach to OC. He was a QB coach under Cully. Okay. And they've got history, Lovey and Pep do. So it would be tough, but there's absolutely no way they can roll things back, barring some miraculous winning streak none of us see coming to close out this season. Between Lovey Smith, Pep Hamilton, and Davis Mills, two of the three, whichever two, two of the three have to go, if not all three. Those are the three. Right. Those are the three that are catching all the heat. Caserio's not catching the heat yet, because he had such a massive cleanup job from the disaster O'Brien left behind. They're still carrying $70 million in dead cap money this year from bad contracts, Bill O'Brien. $70 million. A few of them are Nick deals that didn't go well, but the majority of it is Deshaun Watson and bad O'Brien deals. So I think this is the year, this coming draft, and then this coming free agency, when the Texans will have among the most cap space to spend in free agency. This is really where Judgment Day starts to begin hardcore for Nick Caserio. But right now, Doug, it's Lovey, it's Pep, it's Davis. Those are the three guys.
Sean, it was odd, I think, to most of the rest of the football world that Brandon Cooks is still on this team, particularly when you're talking about getting draft picks and starting over. Explain to us how he's still on the roster.
That Brandon Cooks is here. Yeah. Now that was good to go back to Easterby. Brandon Cooks was a big Easterby guy. They were together in New England that 1 year that Brandon Cooks was there. And Brandon, I remember going to Jack Easterby's Twitter feed back when he first got here. This is in 2019. I'm like, man, he sure does retweet Brandon Cooks a lot. This is when Cooks was on the Rams. He retweets Brandon Cooks all the time. And then sure enough, March of 2020, right in the middle of the horrible Bill O'Brien GM year, where it's O'Brien and Easterby running everything, they trade DeAndre Hopkins for nothing. And then they 3 weeks later trade for Brandon Cooks. And I'm like, okay, well, that's an Easterby move right there. That's his boy. And when Easterby got fired during the bye week this year, week 6, Brandon Cooks started acting out. You know what I mean? That was his guy. So all these things where he's doing these cryptic tweets of covering up lies and, you're taking my kindness for granted and all this other emo stuff that we see with players these days on social media. Yeah. Everybody's rolling their eyes he's mad that Jack's not there anymore. That's his guy, So they tried to trade him. Nick tried to trade him at the trade deadline. They had some deals lined up. The problem was, and this is Nick's fault, the problem was that Caserio gave Brandon Cooks a contract extension back in April before the season started with $36 million guaranteed in it, a 2-year, $36 million extension. So if they were to trade him, they'd be taking a huge cap hit, not only on the dead money from the bonus in that deal, but also his $18 million for next year is fully guaranteed. So teams aren't wanting to trade for him right now. He's been terrible this year. That's it. I mean, that's the other thing, Doug. He's not playing well. It's one thing to be a cancer in the locker room. He was a captain of this team. And not anymore. Right. Yeah, not anymore. Ironically, Laramie Tunsil is now a captain, and Laramie skipped out on the last 12 games last year, nursing a wrist injury that took like 3 weeks to heal, and he's just like, nah, my wrist still hurts for like the last 2 months of the season. So it's been a really dysfunctional team. I think once you get Cooks cleaned out of here, that's going to be a big element of the Easterby regime, that Easterby era out of the building, and it'll just be a much more conventional bad football team. Like that's where we are right now. We just want to be conventional.
Stuck with Cooks then for this year and next year?
I think probably this year. Here's the thing. I think the best thing. So Cooks was back on the field this past game. He missed the Eagle game because he basically took his ball and went home when they didn't trade him, and so they benched him for the Eagle game. And then in the Giants game this past weekend, he played. The touchdown that got called back was actually a touchdown that he would have scored in that game. So he's with the team. He's now on the team. I think the best thing for everybody is for Brandon Cooks to ball out for these last 8 games. He don't want to be here. I don't think the Texans want him here, but the contract is the big problem. They don't want him here, but they also don't want to take a $40 million cap hit or whatever it is, to get rid of him or to cut him. And I think they can get something for him if he plays well these last 8 games, and maybe you got to meet some middle ground. He's got to give up some guaranteed money or whatever the case may be. But now the situation you're in, it's like it's like when you're getting divorced, but you're still married on paper and you're in the same house with each other and you're, kind of coexisting.
Right.
That's kind of what it is.
Not awkward at all.
No. Yeah. And I've been through one of those, so I can relate 100%. To what the Texans and Cooks are feeling right now. I can tell you just from the emotion in town here, Cooks is not a sympathetic figure at all. Right. I've been really hard on Brandon the last week or so on my show, basically saying because he did do some media last week, the first time he's done media since his little episode, and he got pressed on some of the things he tweeted about, and he wouldn't answer. He's like, I'm going to keep that internal. And I think the feeling here is like, he doesn't want to be part of a rebuild, but it's like, dude, you signed a contract in April. Like you knew who the quarterback was. You knew who the head coach was. You knew who the OC was. You knew this was a bad football team. I mean, you're either somebody who is just a duplicitous person or you're the worst evaluator of talent in the history of football. If you thought this was going to be some sort of miraculous turnaround. But that goes back to Easterby, who was this toxic positivity guy. He was one of those guys that just thought, that, faith can get us out of anything, like just stay positive, Brandon, these things, I could just see Easterby gassing Brandon up. Like, Brandon, if you stay positive, good things are going to happen. I could see that happening where Brandon got kind of brainwashed by Jack Easterby the way some do. And at any rate, yeah, he's still here. I don't know that the Commanders necessarily need to worry much about him. He hasn't been very good this year. I think some of it is just Pep Hamilton's play calling is not aggressive at all. But yeah, Brandon Cooks is here now, but he'll probably be gone in the offseason.
How many years are left on the Tunsil deal?
1 more year after this. Yeah. And Tunsil's played really well this year. He's been a bright spot.
I thought so.
Yeah. He's been among the really, he's, I don't know if he's going to make the Pro Bowl because he plays on a horrible team, but he deserves to. He's been excellent this year. I think he's somebody
easy to forget how good he was coming out of college, man. Like what kind of stud he really can be at full health.
He should have been the first pick in that draft, but the gas mask thing on draft night, I say first pick. He was in 2016, so 2 teams moved up and took Goff and Wentz.
But he dropped significother.
He dropped to 13. Yeah, I mean there were 2 tackles taken before him. Ronnie Stanley got taken before him. I think Conklin, maybe one other tackle that I might be missing. Yeah, Tunsil's been really good. He's got 1 year left on his deal. If they got an offer for him this offseason, considering they're still rebuilding, if someone offered them a first for Laramie Tunsil, would they do it? Maybe. But I think Nick Caserio's grown to like Laramie Tunsil, which I would not have thought towards the end of last year when he was kind of jaking his way through an injury and sitting. But Tunsil's been a bright spot this year.
And he's only 28.
Yeah, he's still young.
For some reason, I was thinking he was a little older than I looked at it. Looked it up today. Only 28.
And that's a position that ages pretty well. You know what I mean? Good tackles play till their mid-30s at least. So I'm cool. I'm cool with, they're going to have to invest money in somebody at some point with this team. And if part of it is a franchise left tackle who's really good in pass protection and getting better at blocking in the run game, then I'm cool with that. Plus, he's fun to cover too. He's good for a one-liner or two.
I've heard he's a character.
Yeah, he's good.
It's interesting. The line came out. I think Commanders are 2.5-point favorites. It's not like the Commanders have been world beaters, but I was surprised that it was 2.5. Were you?
A little bit, except the thing, Doug, is that the Texans have kept games close this year. I don't know how, because they're awful at defending the run. I mean, like historically bad at defending the run, and their quarterback play is bad. Like the foundations of what you do on either side of the ball, like keeping the other team from running the football and building your offense around your quarterback, are two things that are just going horribly for the Texans this year. And yet they find ways to stay in games. I think some of it is that they're so bad that I think their opponents lose interest at time during the games. They get into lulls. Like if you watch that Giant game, like they're kind of lulling their way through it. Like the Titan game in Week 8. If you go look at the Texans' schedule, the final score was 17-10. But the Texans scored a meaningless touchdown late in the game, and the Titans ran for like 300 yards. Like Derrick Henry ran for like 220 yards in that game. But Malik Willis is the quarterback. They threw one pass in the second half. They were just like a cat just sort of batting a mouse around for 60 minutes, And I think a lot of teams do that with the Texans. So there's not been a single game where they've been blown out yet. The Titans game felt like a blowout because it was just so clearly they were the dominant team. But on the scoreboard, it wasn't. And in some of these games, like the Eagle game on Thursday night, 2.5 quarters in, they're trading blows with the Eagles. And then Davis throws an interception. And then that kind of threw the game off schedule for them. They have a very small margin for error. That's the big thing. If they make a big mistake, like a turnover at a bad time, or a bust on a play like Jalen Petrie had against Slayton that we talked about earlier, those are things that really put them behind the 8 ball. They don't have the horsepower to just strike quickly and come back, nor the mentality to do it, I don't think. So, but they're in all these games. Washington's played well lately, but it's Taylor Heineke. He's fun, but he's Taylor Heineke. So there's not much of a home field advantage at NRG. So I'm kind of arguing against myself right now. I'm trying to figure out too why it's only 2.5, because I thought it would be more. It was really weird. The Eagles were 2 touchdown favorites at NRG Stadium.
Right.
And then the Texans go up to New York to play the Giants on the road, a team that was 6-2 at the time. And they're only like 4-point underdogs. And I'm like, okay, so hang on a second here. Like, so what you're saying is this game would be like a pick'em, or like the Texans favored by 1 if it were at NRG. So you're telling me there's a 15-point difference between the Eagles and the Giants? And I know the Eagles are clearly the better football team. The Giants are kind of smoke and mirroring their way through this season. But so yeah, like I don't know what to make of these lines on Texans games anymore. I'm not surprised at all that Washington is favored in this game. I did think it would be more than 2.5. I thought it'd be more than a field goal. I thought it would be around probably maybe 3.5 or 4. I didn't think it would be under a field goal. Yeah. I mean, obviously you go from 2.5 to 3.5. That's a big point, because you're going through the 3.
That's
but
right.
So I expect the Texans to do what they've done all year in all these games, which is for about 2.5 quarters, hang in. And then probably make some cataclysmic error in the game, and then the Washington ground game will grind the Texans front 7 into dust, and they'll win. The Commanders will win by 6 or something like that.
I wrap all these shows on Wednesday, Sean, like this. If Ron Rivera came to you and said, "What's the formula for beating the Texans?" what would you tell him?
I would say just don't beat yourself. Like, run your stuff. You don't have to do anything exotic. Do what you did against the Eagles. Line up and bust them in the mouth 49 times. The dam will break early on the Texans. You run the football. You pound the Texans front 7 with your run game. Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson and whoever else you get involved in that run game, and just pound them into submission. Defensively, I would say, focus on Damian Pierce. He's the head of the snake. The Texans make no secret that they're trying to run the football. So I think if you limit Damian Pierce, you keep the Texans in bad down and distance situations. Davis Mills is going to make enough mistakes non-plays, I'll say. He'll just plays where it's, he sails it over a receiver's head, things like that on third down, throws it short of the sticks on third down. Put the game in Davis Mills' hands, and you'll be just fine.
Yeah, it was interesting when I looked at the depth chart. The front seven on that Texans defense does not have a whole lot of household names on it.
No, they've had 2 rookies actually starting on the interior a couple of these games recently. Kurt Heinisch, who's an undrafted free agent rookie out of Notre Dame, and was a good college player and had a great training camp. That's why he's on the team. But he's been completely overwhelmed. Thomas Booker was the other rookie, a 5th-round pick out of Stanford. So you got 2 rookies. Now that was when Malik Collins was hurt. And Malik Collins is a good football player.
Yes, he is.
But, he's not any of the guys on the Commanders. He's not Dexter Lawrence. Like, he's good for the Texans, and he's a solid enough NFL guy. But if having Malik Collins out there is this huge linchpin or this harbinger or barometer for how your defense is going to defend the run, that's a big problem. So, yeah, not a lot of household names. The best player in their front 7 right now is Jerry Hughes, the veteran defensive end who played at Buffalo. He's got 8 sacks this year. He's been and he's a Houston native. He's tied for 6th in the league right now in sacks. He's been good. And then the other one to watch, I would say, in the front 7 is Christian Harris, the rookie out of Alabama.
Big fan.
Yeah, linebacker out of Alabama. He missed all of training camp and the first 6 games of the season with a hamstring injury. Okay. And then he came back after the bye week. And so he's played in 4 games. His workload the first game back, he played maybe half the snaps. Now he's 100% snap guy. He's on the field the whole game. The Texans are taking these rookies and throwing them into the deep end of the pool. Like, they're letting them sink or swim, which I think is great. Let them take their lumps, get some experience. But in that front 7, Christian Harris he had his first really good game against the Giants last week. He was very, very good. He's number 48. So that's another one. If you're looking for players to watch, number 55, Jerry Hughes, is their main pass rush threat. And Christian Harris is just kind of a fun rookie to watch. Very athletic, one of the fastest linebackers in the draft this year, and an ascending player.
You mentioned the podcast that you were recording earlier today with McCain, I believe, right?
Yeah, John McClain. Yeah.
When can the folks expect for it to be up?
Yeah, well, we have our mailbag episode out today. The one I was recording today is for tomorrow. That's the preview of this weekend's game with the Commanders. So that'll be out tomorrow. We do 3 episodes a week. Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, they drop on the Odyssey app. Odyssey's our parent company, AUDACY, or on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find it. It's called the Hugh-topia Football Podcast, Houtopia Football Podcast. Clever name that the suits up in Philadelphia for our company came up with.
Naturally.
Yes.
Sean, I appreciate the time today. We always try to learn something new on Wednesdays. I think we accomplished that, so I appreciate you.
Doug, anytime, man. I enjoyed it. Enjoy the game this weekend, and holler anytime. I'm happy to do it.
I appreciate you.
All right.